Hey folks, this is Kelani. With everything getting turned upside down in the coming week and everything being reset to a nice fresh slate when Battle for Azeroth goes live, I thought it would be fun to see how the tanks of World of Warcraft are faring amongst all of this change. Which class is better at what? Who would you rather have in a dungeon group or a raid group? Who has the best self-sustain, the best mitigation, the best utility? Well, let's find out. Bear in mind that tanks are probably going to be a little bit slower overall due to the secondary stat changes, and tanks across the board do feel a little squishy right now, especially as you start working your way up Mythic Plus keys. So utility and mobility are going to be very important, alongside the usual mitigation and self-sustain measurements. Let's start with the tanks, who, against all odds, can probably still be the last one standing thanks to their crazy self-sustain. Death Knights will still be the kings and queens of self-sustain with their many talent options like Bloodworms and Blood Drinker, but Deathstrike is still going to be the MVP going into Battle for Azeroth, keeping your health topped off and providing you with a physical damage shield to give you a little bit of extra time to ramp up a few more Death Strikes, or for the healer to maybe step in and make sure you're not falling too low. Being able to heal yourself through smaller pulls and contribute heavily towards keeping yourself alive on some of the crazier AoE pulls opens up some interesting options. Playing with a Discipline Priest or a Holy Paladin would mean that they can spend more time being offensive because you just don't need as much healing, and that's probably what we're going to see a lot of in higher Mythic Plus keys. Death Knights also have quite very defensive abilities with Vampiric Blood to help with that crazy self-sustain, Anti-Magic Shell to give you some active mitigation for all of that pesky magic damage, and Icebound Fortitude provides you with some solid damage reduction for those nasty big hits. So, mitigation, check. Self-sustain, check. Mobility? Uh-oh. So this is where Death Knights fall behind a little bit. Get it? Fall behind? Okay, it's not that bad. Just be wary of trigger-happy DPS who can zoom ahead of you. We do have Death's Advance, which provides 30% increased movement speed on a 45-second cooldown, and Wraithwalk was moved to the talent section, so you can have 2 little speed boosts if you want, but you're still not catching up to the Monks and Demon Hunters anytime soon. Thankfully, Death Knights also bring some decent utility in the form of grips. In raids, this will be very hit or miss. Sometimes you can't use grip at all, sometimes grip and AoE grip are a major saving grace, but throughout dungeons you're going to be the envy of all of the tanks as you precisely reposition everything to your liking. Seriously, grips are still really powerful and awesome, both as a tool to increase AoE potential by gripping everything up, but also as an AoE interrupt if you time it right. If you're looking for a tank who doesn't have to rely on a healer as much as the others, Death Knights are definitely the tank for you. Alongside the edgy Death Knights, we also have the even edgier Demon Hunters. They're also doing pretty well for themselves on the self-sustain front. Sheer always breaks off a lesser soul fragment now, meaning your soul generation is much more reliable and smooth, as opposed to random and sporadic. That means any abilities which consume souls will also provide you with a steady source of self-sustain. Soul fragments also now heal dependent on how much damage you took in the last 5 seconds, making them a great source of reactive healing. I'm not sure if they could quite get to the level of a Death Knight, but they're still leaps and bounds ahead of the other tanks when it comes to keeping yourself alive. Speaking of leaps and bounds, Demon Hunters are also one of the most mobile tanks with their Infernal Strikes, especially if you talent for the 8-second cooldown reduction. You can jump all over the place just to make the Death Knights jealous. On a serious note though, I mentioned earlier that a lot of tanks seem a little squishy right now, which means you're probably going to have to utilize a lot of stuns and a lot of slows to let tanks kite whenever they need to take a break from getting hit in the face. Demon Hunters can leap out of the pack of monsters and start running whenever they need to, giving them a huge head start versus something like a Death Knight, Paladin or Druid. If a Demon Hunter seriously wants to kite, the chances of the monsters actually reaching them before the Demon Hunter wants to re-engage is pretty low, especially if you have AoE slows in your group. Utility is also something that Demon Hunters do pretty well with their variety of sigils. You can AoE crowd control, AoE silence to shut up all of those annoying caster mobs, and even talent for an AoE grip, even if it is only a teeny weeny area of effect. They do bring quite a few things to the table, and if you needed any other reason to pick up a Demon Hunter tank right now, their damage is pretty crazy. Taking the Soul Bomb talent allows you to turn any and all soul fragments into an AoE DPS machine, and Soul Bomb also applies frailty to all targets hit. Whenever you hit a target that's affected by frailty, you heal for 10% of the damage dealt, turning all of that glorious damage into extra self-sustain. The only problem with that right now is that high damage is always something that can be toned down significantly, and if that ever happens, Demon Hunters Hunters will drop quite a few pegs, I think, but for now they're doing pretty well for themselves. The only drawback is that their mitigation isn't all that brilliant. You have Demon Spikes, which is really good mitigation for such a short cooldown ability, but whenever you don't have Demon Spikes up, you're an easy target for some big hits. With the removal of Demonic Wards, we also don't have a great answer to magic damage, and while Fiery Brand is 40% damage reduction, it's only for a single target. Metamorphosis is our largest cooldown, but it's not really on par with some of the 50% damage reduction abilities you see from other classes. So Demon Hunters are good at self-sustain, but right now they're the best tank when it comes to mobility and strong damage. Up next we have what is usually a bit of a wild card, the Brewmaster Monks. I feel like Brewmaster has always been the tank which can get away with the most and pull off the craziest stunts, and I don't think that's going to change in Battle for Azeroth. I think Monks will be the tanks with the highest potential, perhaps even the best tanks overall just because of how they work and what they bring to the table. Brewmasters never take the full brunt of any attack, and with Iron Skin Brew up constantly, you end up taking consistent damage over time, making Monks the best tank for smoothing out damage spikes, which gives your healer a lot of wiggle room to get you topped off. With Purifying Brew, you can also just delete damage being dealt to you. It's insane what Brewmasters can get away with right now at the end of Legion. Obviously, it won't be anywhere near as crazy at the start of an expansion, but the potential is still there. We have a few cooldowns to help with extra mitigation too if things get really bad. Fortifying Brew just improves everything you're doing already, and we can even take Guard as a talent, which provides us with a large absorb shield which prevents staggered damage, once again providing a really smooth tanking experience. Now, a Monk's self-healing has been taken down a notch as the amount of healing you get from spheres has been reduced, but at least you still have an option to get a little bit of health back for yourself. They also boast some very good mobility with Roll or Torpedo if you decide to talent for it, which will allow you to kite when needed, reposition during raid encounters, or just get over to the next pack of mobs faster. But I think Monks are really going to shine when it comes to their utility in dungeons and the interesting things you can do with it. All Monks come equipped with leg sweeps, so you're always guaranteed to have that AoE stun when you need it, even if your DPS don't have one themselves, or if you just don't trust them to use it because you're pugging. Monks will also be applying a slow effect to anything they hit with Keg Smash, which will usually be everything you're trying to tank, just to help out with kiting a little bit, and then we also have Ring of Peace as a talent option still, which can be used to hilarious effect in a variety of ways. Honestly, having Stagger and everything surrounding it will make Monks a great tank for raiding. Smoothing out all of those crazy boss hits will always be valuable, but they're also going to be a fantastic tank for Dungeons and Mythic Plus. Keep an eye on this one for sure. I still believe they're the tank with the most potential. Let's have a look at our glorious golden boys, and girls of course, the Protection Paladins. Paladins are doing really well for themselves. Quite a few things are changing from Legion to Battle for Azeroth, but your playstyle probably won't change that much. Mastery is now tied to Consecration, and when you stand in Consecration you get a flat damage reduction buff. It doesn't seem like you could get that damage reduction high enough to warrant stacking Mastery, but it's a nice bonus which is basically free damage reduction. Besides losing our artifact ability, our main kit isn't really changing either. Shield of the Righteous does have a nice little benefit of not requiring a target anymore, and it's now a frontal cone attack, giving us even more AoE damage. Throw in a few bouncing shields, the constant damage from Consecration, the AoE effects on Hammer of the Righteous, and you have a delicious recipe for AoE damage and threat generation. Paladins are the best AoE tanks right now, and if you pull enough mobs you can reach some pretty crazy numbers thanks to the resets from Grand Crusader. But they're a little bit more than that as well. Shield of the Righteous gives you some really good mitigation with great uptime. Ardent Defender and Guardian of Ancient Kings gives you two options to defend yourself against big hits. You can talent for Holy Shield to provide some much needed magic damage mitigation, and you can even supply a magic immunity to your group. So the damage immunity is definitely there, but what about self-sustain? This is one of the prop Paladin's downfalls. You're not going to keep yourself alive as easily as a Death Knight or a Demon Hunter, but you can still survive for a while. Light of the Protector can heal you for a huge chunk of health, especially if you wait until you get really low to use it. I've topped myself off to nearly full a few times with lucky crits, so you do have self-sustain. It's just not going to keep you alive against all odds. Mobility is another area where Paladins aren't doing too great. We have Divine Steed, and that's about it. It's a good boost of speed, don't get me wrong, and riding your charger into battle looks pretty cool, but you're still going to be eating the dust of Monks and Demon Hunters, but at least you'll stay a few feet ahead of the Death Knights. Protection Paladins have a little bit of everything. Combine that with their fun playstyle, easy to understand mechanics, and bouncing shields, and I'd say Paladins are the best well-rounded tank. And then we have the tank which is sort of getting left behind, the Protection Warriors. These chaps have had quite a roller coaster throughout beta. At one point they didn't really have any good constant mitigation because Ignore Pain was just outright removed. It eventually made its way back in, but it's only a 50% damage reduction and the shield provided isn't all that large. It also doesn't have a huge maximum value, so you can't stack it up before some heavy damage. The rage scaling was also removed. It now costs a flat 40 rage for a flat absorb amount. Honestly, it feels way better to just spend your rage on shield blocks, and if you don't have a shield block charge available, or if you have plenty of excess rage, then start funneling it into Ignore Pain. Rage generation is also something of an interesting problem for warrior tanks. On single target fights, your rage generation is pretty low, which means you're going to have limited access to both shield block and Ignore Pain, so Ignore Pain kind of gets thrown out the window, except on fights with a lot of magic damage, where Ignore Pain actually gains some decent value. Speaking of magic damage, we do have Spell Reflect, which provides a minor damage reduction to incoming magic damage and reflects a single spell, so warrior magic damage mitigation is still fairly decent. If you're able to pull quite a few monsters, however, your rage generation kicks into overdrive, and you can happily keep your shield blocks running and spam Ignore Pain. So if you get some good AoE pulls going, warriors become a lot more fun to play. It's just a little slow whenever you get to a boss. You rely a lot on resets of shield slam, which obviously isn't guaranteed. Warriors also have a bit of a problem with self-sustain. In fact, they don't really have any at all. Without a healer, you're going downhill until you either get to use Victory Rush, which isn't all that likely in dungeons or raids, and especially not on bosses, or the healer decides to top you off. You can't really do anything healing-wise on your own, which is a bit frustrating. There is an upside for prot warriors though. Along with their decent mitigation, they also have really good mobility. A few charges of charge and heroic leap let you zip around the battlefield pretty quickly, so getting from pack to pack in a dungeon shouldn't be too difficult. Overall, I think warriors will end up towards the lower end of the pack as they don't shine particularly brightly in most situations. And last and sort of least is the Guardian Druids. Bears just seem like too much effort to play, and that's not because you have too much to do or too many abilities to think about, it's exactly the opposite. You have Thrash, Maul, and Swipe. If you're interested in doing anything more than swipe spam for the majority of a dungeon, Bear Druids are not going to be for you, which is really disappointing for me because bears look pretty cool with their new Legion models and they have fantastic mitigation abilities. They're just so boring to play. But sure, not all of us play a tank to have fun. It's all about how well we can soak up damage, which bears continue to do very well. Iron Fur provides a hefty amount of damage mitigation for physical damage, and you should have at least one stack rolling at all times. If things get a little too hairy, we still have Bark Skin for a minor damage reduction cooldown, and 2 charges of our hefty 50% damage reduction cooldown Survival Instincts. Bears might have some of the best mitigation right now, but if you can't get past the part where you're either spamming Thrash or spamming Swipe, it's going to be a long expansion. As for self-sustain, well, bears still have Frenzied Regeneration, which provides you with 24% of your max health on a 30-second cooldown. Not too bad, but still not quite in the realms of Death Knight or Demon Hunter. Paladins might actually get a better deal out of their Light of the Protector heal, honestly. When it comes to mobility, Druids are unique in that they don't just give themselves a boost of speed, but Stampeding Roar gives your entire group increased movement speed, which can be very useful in dungeons, but is still going to be incredibly powerful in raids. Giving your entire group a little kick up the butt to get out of the fire, get across the room, or just reposition faster will always be very valuable. I would say Druid Tanks are the play for the group tanks once again, not all that fun to play, but you're taking one for the team because they're still pretty strong. And that's it. I would say monks are definitely going to be contenders for the top. Demon Hunters, Paladins and Death Knights will be great choices as well. Warriors will probably lag behind quite a bit, and Druids are just completely up to you. Personally, I wouldn't ever play one, but if you value the group's progress over your personal enjoyment, then it could be a good pick as well. What do you think of the tanks in Battle for Azeroth so far? Who would you rather see in the queue for your Mythic Plus keys? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. If you want to hop on that train, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.